During a gala dinner with dozens of millionaire investors, my father stood up, placed his hand on my sister's shoulder, and said into the microphone, "This is my daughter, my true legacy. Harvard graduate director at 28 years old. My pride." Then someone asked, "And your son?" My father looked directly at me, sitting in the back of the room, and responded with a cold smile. "Him? He was a mistake. An accident I'm still paying for." The room fell silent. Everyone looked at me, and in that moment, something inside me died. But something much stronger began to be born. This is the story of how the mistake saved the empire of the man who never loved him. Before we continue, if you've ever been through something similar, if you've ever felt rejected by someone who should have loved you, leave your comment down below telling us where you're from. You're not alone. And if this story is touching your heart, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more real stories of overcoming. Now let's continue. The ballroom was impeccable. Crystal chandeliers, tables covered with white linen cloths, waiters serving French champagne. It was my father's company's annual party, an event where he displayed his fortune, his achievements, and, of course, his perfect daughter. My sister Victoria was radiant. Navy blue silk dress, hair pulled back in an elegant bun, smile trained for cameras. She was everything my father had ever wanted. Intelligent, ambitious, flawless. At 28 years old, she was already executive director of the company. Everyone admired her. I was there because I was forced to be. Sitting at a table in the corner, far from the spotlight, wearing a suit my father didn't even notice. No one came to talk to me. No one ever did. Then it happened. One of the investors, a man with gray hair and a deep voice, raised his glass and asked loudly, "Richard, you have 2 children, right? Where's the other one?" The entire room turned to my father. He hesitated for a second, just 1 second, and then smiled. That smile I knew so well. The smile that said, "You don't matter." "Ah, yes," he said, pointing vaguely in my direction. "He's over there." But honestly, he was more of a mistake than anything else. Victoria is my true legacy. She's the one I invest my time and hope in. Nervous laughter echoed through the room. Some people looked at me with pity. Others simply looked away, uncomfortable. Victoria kept smiling as if nothing had happened, but I felt every word like a knife to the chest. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, frozen, while my father continued his speech about how proud he was of his real child. When the dinner ended, I left without saying goodbye. No one noticed. That night changed everything. But to understand why those words hurt so much, you need to know my story. You need to know what it's like to grow up being compared to perfection, and always falling short. My childhood was a competition I never signed up for. Victoria was 3 years older than me, and from the moment I was born, I was measured against her. When she learned to read at 4, my father expected me to do the same. When she won the school science fair at 7, I was pressured to win it at 5. I remember bringing home my report card once. Straight A's, except for 1 B in math. My father looked at it, sighed, and said, "Your sister never got a B." I remember my 8th birthday. I had drawn a picture of our family for weeks, working on every detail because I wanted to give it to him as a gift. When I showed it to him, he glanced at it for 2 seconds and said, "That's nice. Victoria painted a portrait when she was your age that we hung in the office. He never hung mine anywhere. I found it in the trash the next day, crumpled beneath coffee grounds and yesterday's newspaper. I smoothed it out, folded it carefully, and kept it hidden in my room for years. A reminder of the day I learned that my best would never be good enough. Every achievement of mine was minimized. Every failure was magnified. And Victoria? She floated through life effortlessly, collecting trophies and praise while I scrambled for crumbs of attention. The worst part? She never stood up for me. She never told our father to stop. She just accepted her role as the golden child and let me drown in his indifference. I remember one Christmas when I was 12. My father gave Victoria a brand new laptop for school, top of the line, engraved with her initials. When I opened my gift, it was a second-hand calculator and a note that said, "Maybe this will help you catch up." I remember my high school graduation. I had worked myself to exhaustion to finish in the top 10% of my class. My father attended, but he spent the entire ceremony on his phone. When they called my name, he didn't clap. But 3 years earlier, when Victoria graduated valedictorian, he'd thrown a party for 200 people. I remember applying to colleges. My guidance counselor told me I had a real shot at some prestigious schools. I was excited, hopeful, but when I told my father, he said, "Don't waste your time. We both know you're not Harvard material like your sister. Just go to state school and study something practical." So I did. I went to state school. I studied business. I kept my head down and tried not to hope for anything more. But the comparisons never stopped. At family dinners, my father would talk about Victoria's internships, her job offers, her promotions. When relatives asked about me, he'd say, "Oh, he's doing fine, I suppose. Nothing special, nothing special." That's what I was to him. Nothing special. After that dinner, I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg for his love anymore. I wasn't going to compete for his approval. I was done. 3 days later, I packed my bags and left. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't leave a note. I just disappeared. My father didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't even ask Victoria where I was. As far as he was concerned, the mistake had finally corrected itself by leaving. But Victoria called. Once. 2 weeks after I left. "Where are you?" she asked. Her voice was tight, controlled. "Does it matter?" I replied. "Dad's upset." I laughed bitterly. "No, he's not. He's relieved." There was a long pause. Then quietly, "Maybe you're right." She hung up. We didn't speak again for 3 years. 3 years passed. During that time, I rebuilt myself from scratch. I moved to another city, got a job at a small consulting firm, and worked like my life depended on it. Because, in a way, it did. I wasn't working for money or status. I was working to prove to myself that I was worth something. And slowly, painfully, I started to believe it. Those first months were brutal. I lived in a tiny studio apartment with a mattress on the floor and a single lamp. I ate ramen most nights. I worked 15-hour days, taking on every project no one else wanted, volunteering for the impossible deadlines and the difficult clients. But I learned. God, did I learn. I learned that failure wasn't fatal. I learned that asking questions wasn't weakness. I learned that I could trust my own judgment, that my ideas had value, that I didn't need someone else's approval to move forward. I took courses, earned certifications, networked with people who actually saw my value. I attended conferences, read everything I could get my hands on, stayed up late studying case after case of business turnarounds and crisis management. Within 2 years, I became one of the top business consultants in the region. Companies fought over my services. I was respected, valued, needed. One CEO told me I had saved his company from bankruptcy. Another sent me a bottle of expensive scotch with a note that said, "You're a miracle worker." I wasn't a miracle worker. I was just someone who'd spent his whole life being told he wasn't good enough, and had finally decided to prove everyone wrong, especially myself. But I never contacted my family, and they never contacted me until that Tuesday afternoon. Then, one random Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "Hello?" Silence. Then, a voice I hadn't heard in 3 years. "It's your father." My heart stopped. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My hand shook slightly as I held the phone. Then I said coldly, "What do you want?" "I need your help." His voice was tight, strained. Different from the confident, dismissive tone I remembered. "The company is in trouble. Serious trouble. We're about to lose everything." I laughed. Actually laughed. "And you thought of me? The mistake? Please." He had never said that word to me before. Never. Victoria tried to handle it, but she couldn't. "We need someone who understands crisis management. Your name came up in a business network. Someone recommended you. I didn't even know you were doing this kind of work." Of course he didn't. He never asked. "Why should I help you?" I said quietly. "You made it very clear I was worthless. You called me a mistake in front of 100 people. You never believed in me. You never even tried." "I know." His voice cracked. "I know I did. But this isn't about me. It's about 500 employees who will lose their jobs if this company goes under. People who have been loyal for decades. People with families. Please." I should have said no. I should have hung up and let him drown in the consequences of his own arrogance. Let him feel what it's like to fail. Let him know what rejection tastes like. But I thought about those 500 people. People who had nothing to do with my father's cruelty. People with families, mortgages, dreams. People who didn't deserve to suffer because of my father's mistakes. Or Victoria's. "I'll do it," I said. "But not for you, for them. And I want full autonomy. You don't question my decisions. You don't interfere. You hired me as a consultant, so you let me consult. Understood?" "Yes, anything. And one more thing," I added. "Don't call me son. You lost that right." The silence that followed was deafening. When I walked into the company headquarters a week later, everything looked the same, but I was completely different. I wasn't the awkward kid in the ill-fitting suit anymore. I was confident, composed, dressed in tailored clothing that spoke of success. I carried myself like someone who knew his worth. My shoes were polished. My briefcase was leather. My handshake was firm. The receptionist didn't even recognize me. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking up from her computer. "I'm here to see Richard Warren," I said. "He's expecting me." "And you are?" "His consultant." She paused, then nodded and made a call. A minute later, I was being escorted to the executive floor. A floor I'd only been to once before, as a child, when my father had forgotten I existed during Bring Your Child to Work Day and left me sitting in the lobby for 6 hours. When I walked into the boardroom, my father stood up, his face pale and exhausted. He looked older than I remembered, grayer, smaller somehow. Victoria was there too, looking smaller than I remembered, her eyes red from crying. Her perfect hair was pulled back hastily. Her suit was wrinkled. She looked nothing like the golden child from the gala. "Thank you for coming," my father said stiffly. I didn't shake his hand. "Show me the numbers." The situation was worse than I thought. Victoria had spearheaded a massive expansion project into international markets without proper research. She'd sunk millions into ventures that were doomed from the start. Factories in regions with unstable governments, partnerships with companies that turned out to be fronts for money laundering, distribution networks that collapsed within months. She'd made every mistake in the book, and because everyone trusted her, because she was the golden child, no one had questioned her decisions until it was too late. Investors were furious. Lawsuits were pending. The company was bleeding money at a rate of nearly $500,000 per week. For the first time in her life, Victoria had failed, and she had failed spectacularly. She sat across from me during the first meeting, unable to meet my eyes. Her hands trembled as she pushed documents toward me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I thought I could handle it. I thought I was good enough." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I'd never seen before. Vulnerability. Fear. The weight of being perfect had finally crushed her. She wasn't the untouchable golden child anymore. She was just a scared woman who'd been set up to fail by expectations she could never meet. "You were never given permission to fail," I said quietly. "That's the difference between us. I failed 1,000 times because no one expected anything from me. You never learned how. And now, when it actually mattered, you didn't know how to recover." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to do." "That's why I'm here," I said, not unkindly. "Now let me work." I spent the next 6 weeks working 18-hour days. I restructured deals, called in favors from contacts I'd built over 3 years of networking. I negotiated with investors, showing them recovery projections, convincing them that their money wasn't lost, just delayed. I cut losses, shut down the failing international ventures, redirected resources to profitable domestic operations. I brought in my own team, people I trusted, people who knew how to move fast and think creatively. I created a recovery plan that was aggressive but achievable. Every decision was calculated. Every move was strategic. My father tried to interfere once. I shut him down in front of the entire board. "You hired me to fix this," I said coldly. "So let me fix it. Or I walk, and you can watch your legacy crumble." He never questioned me again, and slowly, impossibly, it started to work. The investors calmed down. The lawsuits were settled out of court with agreements that protected the company's future. The company stabilized. Within 2 months, we were back in the black. Within 3, we were profitable again. The board was stunned. My father watched me work with an expression I couldn't read, something between shame and awe. Victoria started asking me questions. At first, I was distant, professional. But gradually, I started to see her differently. She wasn't the enemy. She was just another victim of our father's impossible standards. "How did you learn all this?" she asked one late night when we were both still in the office. "By failing," I said simply. "And getting back up. Over and over. I'm sorry," she said suddenly. "I'm sorry I never stood up for you. I'm sorry I let him treat you that way. I was a coward." I looked at her for a long moment. "Yes, you were." She flinched but nodded. "I know. But you're here now," I said. "You're learning. That counts for something." On the last day, after the final meeting where I presented the completed recovery plan, my father asked to speak with me privately. We stood in his office, the same office where he'd once told me I'd never amount to anything, the same office where he'd thrown away my birthday drawing, the same office where he'd informed me I wasn't Harvard material. "You saved us," he said, his voice thick. "You saved everything." "I saved the company," I corrected. "Not you," he flinched. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I was a terrible father. I called you a mistake, and I can't take that back." "No, you can't. But I was wrong." Tears filled his eyes. The first time I'd ever seen him cry. You were never a mistake. I was the mistake. I destroyed my relationship with my son because I was too blind, too arrogant, too obsessed with perfection to see what was right in front of me. You were extraordinary all along, and I missed it. I missed watching you grow. I missed knowing you. I missed everything. I stood there, arms crossed, waiting. You're extraordinary, he continued. You always were. And I missed it. I missed all of it. And now it's too late. For a long moment I didn't say anything. Part of me wanted to leave him there, crying, broken, feeling a fraction of the pain he'd caused me. But another part of me, a bigger part, was just tired. Tired of carrying the weight of his rejection. Tired of letting his words define me. Then, finally, you're right. It is too late. I don't need your approval anymore, Dad. I don't need you to tell me I'm worth something. I already know I am. I don't need you to be proud of me. I'm proud of myself. I understand, he whispered. But, I said slowly, I can forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I deserve to let go of this anger. I deserve to move forward without carrying you with me anymore. He broke down then, sobbing like a child. And for the first time in my life, I hugged my father. Not because I needed him, but because he needed me. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the years of pain, but it was a start. I didn't stay at the company. I didn't take a position on the board or accept my father's offers of money or recognition. I went back to my life, the life I'd built on my own. I had clients who valued me. I had work that fulfilled me. I had proof that I was worth something, and I didn't need it to come from him. But things were different now. Victoria and I started talking. Real conversations where she admitted how suffocating it was to be the perfect daughter. How she envied my freedom to fail and grow. How she'd always felt like she was performing, never just existing. How exhausting it was to live up to impossible standards. I used to hate you, she admitted one day over coffee. Not because of anything you did, but because you got to be free. You got to make mistakes. You got to be human. That wasn't freedom, I told her. That was abandonment. But I turned it into freedom. There's a difference, she nodded slowly. Teach me how, and I did. We became something we'd never been before, siblings. Real siblings. My father sent me letters. Short ones at first, then longer. Apologies, updates, attempts to rebuild what he'd destroyed. He told me about his own father. A harsh, critical man who'd made him feel worthless. He told me he'd sworn he'd never be like that, and then had become exactly that. I don't know when I became him, he wrote. But somewhere along the way, I did. And I'm sorry, I responded sometimes. Not always. I didn't owe him constant communication, but I gave him something, a chance. Not to be my father again. That ship had sailed. But to be a person in my life. A person who'd hurt me and was trying to do better. I didn't owe him anything, but I chose connection over bitterness. A year later, I received an invitation to the company's annual gala. The same event where I'd been called a mistake. I almost didn't go. The thought of walking into that ballroom again made my stomach turn. But my assistant convinced me. Show them who you are now, she said. Show them what they almost destroyed. So I went. This time I didn't sit in the back. I was invited to the head table. Investors who'd once ignored me now shook my hand and asked for my card. People who'd laughed at my father's cruel joke now treated me with respect. And when my father stood up to give his speech, he said something different. His hands shook slightly as he held the microphone. He looked out at the crowd, then directly at me. A year ago, he began, I stood in this room and said something I will regret for the rest of my life. I called my son a mistake. I diminished him in front of all of you because I was too blind to see what he really was. The room went silent. People shifted uncomfortably. Victoria reached over and squeezed my hand. I want to introduce you to my son, he continued, his voice breaking. A man who saved this company when I couldn't. A man who succeeded not because of me, but in spite of me. A man who had every reason to let us fail and chose to save us anyway. A man who taught me that worth isn't measured by perfection. It's measured by resilience, by character, by the ability to rise after being knocked down again and again. The room erupted in applause. People stood up, clapping, looking at me with respect, with admiration, with recognition. My father looked at me with tears streaming down his face. I'm finally learning to be proud of you, and I'm sorry it took me so long. And this time, I wasn't sitting in the back. I was standing right beside him. I stood up, walked to the microphone, and spoke for the first time at one of these events. Thank you, I said simply. But I didn't do this for recognition. I did it because 500 people deserved better than to pay for mistakes that weren't theirs. I did it because I learned something my father never taught me. That your value isn't determined by what others think of you. It's determined by what you do when no one believes in you. I looked out at the crowd. If there's anyone here who's ever been called a mistake, who's ever been told they're not good enough, who's ever felt invisible, this is for you. You are not what they said you were. You are what you choose to become. And that choice is yours alone. The applause was deafening. Being called a mistake doesn't define who you are. It defines the person who said it. You don't need anyone's approval to prove your worth. Not your parents, not your family's, not anyone's. You just need your own belief, your own work, your own resilience, and one day, the people who underestimated you will realize what they lost. But by then, you'll be so far ahead that it won't even matter anymore. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt like the underdog in your own family, drop a comment below and tell us your story. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances and redemption. And subscribe to this channel for more stories that remind you that your worth is not determined by those who failed to see it. You are not a mistake. You never were. And your story isn't over yet.